As we enter Colorectal Cancer Canada's 6th annual Patient-Centered Approach to Clinical Trials Conference, we'd like to take a few moments to acknowledge and celebrate the advancements and accomplishments that have been made over the past 5 years in patient and patient group engagement in the clinical trial process. As the saying goes, the past is there for us to study and learn from so that we can make a better future. A consistent and key goal of this conference has been to bring together all cancer ecosystem stakeholders to mutually and collaboratively define and expand patient and patient group engagement in the clinical trial process. Progress has been solid and strong, an affirmation of the commitment of the cancer care community. As in all things challenging, much more work is required, which is why this conference is in place, with a continued focus on innovation and disruption. I've had the great privilege of facilitating and moderating these conferences from inception. With me today is our 4 conference co-chairs, most of whom have also served as co-chairs since our first conference in 2017. The direction and content of these conferences is an absolute result of the expertise that has been gained from these co-chairs. All of our co-chairs are thought leaders, consistently bringing best-in-class thinking and commitment to evolution of patient and patient group engagement in clinical trials to the table. With Barry also at the table, I am personally thrilled that we could bring these 5 people together to reflect on past accomplishments and where this has brought us to today. Importantly, we will also discuss how these accomplishments can be launch pads for future effort and meaningful change. I'd like to first welcome Dr. Stéphanie Michaud, who is the President and CEO of BioCanRx, a not-for-profit organization that seeks to accelerate the delivery of innovative immunotherapies from the bench to the bedside. In this position, Stéphanie is responsible for running all facets of the organization, striving to create partnerships between government, not-for-profits, academia, and industry to maximize the impact of research funded by the BioCanRx network on the lives of those affected by cancer. I can say from personal experience that Dr. Michaud is an expert partnership builder, and the speakers we have had at these conferences are a direct result of this. Dr. Winson Cheung is a GI medical oncologist, a clinician scientist, and a cancer health services researcher, currently serving as chair and provincial director of the Health Services Research Program at Cancer Control, Alberta. Dr. Cheung has contributed significantly to building capacity and knowledge generation in the area of real-world evidence in oncology. Our conferences have benefited significantly for Dr. Cheung's expertise in this area. Michaud Duong is the head of innovation for Hoffmann-La Roche Limited across all of its Canadian divisions, including Roche Pharmaceuticals, Roche Diagnostics, and Roche Diabetes Care. Michael also leads the Roche Innovation Hive, which is the creative space where the future of healthcare is being imagined and co-created between Roche and its external partners. Michael is also a founding board member of the Canadian Personalized Healthcare Innovation Network, which is a not-for-profit organization and corporation representing a consortium of members from both public and private sectors, focused on the acceleration of personalized healthcare in Canada. Michael has always brought innovative and out-of-the-box thinking to these conferences, which is one of the key reasons for its ongoing success. And finally, we welcome Stephen Sundquist, who is the Executive Director of 3CTN, with over 25 years of experience in clinical trial operations and health programs leadership. The Canadian Cancer Clinical Trials Network maintains a portfolio of over 800 multi-center academic cancer clinical trials and mobilizes and supports a pan-Canadian community of over 250 investigators, clinical research professionals, and patient partners. Stephen's ability to draw the connections between diverse stakeholders and complex subject matter has brought fresh and disruptive thinking to our conference agendas. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin with you, Barry, as the president and CEO of Colorectal Cancer Canada, and who has led these conferences for now 6 years. If you can talk briefly about the vision you had for these conferences in the early days. What are some of the key accomplishments that have happened because of the conferences? And how do you think they set up the next 5 years?
Well, that's a pretty big question. So thank you very much for that excellent introduction, Anne-Marie. There's a lot to think about really in terms of where we're going. But looking back, first of all, I think one of the reasons why we started with this clinical trials conference was really to make it a little bit of a different type of conference and try to imagine how patients and patient groups could really form the basis of everything that we do in these conferences. So patient centricity really was what was at the table. In fact, what we said is we are the table. We don't need to have a chair around the table or occupy one. We are the table. So from that perspective, we started to say, how could we actually build something where it would set a model in Canada for patient and patient group participation in the clinical trial process so that we can really better understand patient perspectives throughout the trial, but also how to ideate a trial so that it would be meet the patient needs all the way through and develop protocols that really made a lot more sense. So over the years, what we tried to do is gather the right people around the table to accomplish those goals, starting first with our patient group pathways model to improve clinical trials in Canada and increase access and recruitment to these trials, as well as retain patients in the trials, make them really fit for use, so to speak, and developed a charter that went along with that in order to help govern the relationship between trial sponsors and patient groups as well. But really, if you think about looking back to the 6 years of this conference, including this year, the first few years, 2017, 18, and 19, were really about building that consensus around patient centricity, the model, and the charter. And then something happened in 2020 where I think we really went into gear and started to look at all sorts of things, including shortening the time to patient, access to drugs, and so forth. Looking at different models in terms of access to precision medicines and molecular profiling, looking at value-based outcomes agreements, the use of artificial intelligence, a whole host of things. If you look back at the conferences, many of which are on our website, you can actually see those sessions and really understand how we actually developed forward in terms of patient centricity and access to different medications throughout the clinical trial process, and bring together that international perspective as well. And we've had people from all over the United States talking about new advances in terms of, for example, foundation medicines would be a good one, where we looked at all these new mutations that could be advanced and governed with in clinical trials, and taking a look at what Lily and Sue had done, for example, in terms of creating trials around that in order to accommodate these very small populations of patients who had certain specific mutations. So really redefining the way trials are done, working with Health Canada and the FDA and Project Orbis and understanding some of those things. So many different things, and making it sort of really a variety of inputs in the whole drug development process where patients and patient groups could play a role. And so quite different from any other clinical trial conference that exists around the world effectively. And I would actually say that it's not just unique in that regard, but our people who come to see it are very unique as well. A very mixed audience, which would be from patient groups to industry to regulators to health technology assessment people. And in fact, this type of work actually affected everything that we do at Colorectal Cancer Canada. And we started to view things through this process as a kind of cycle of drug development where patients and patient centricity was involved, looking at it from the very, very beginning in terms of the clinical trial ideation, through the trial, how patient values and perspectives were affected, how we would be involved in health technology assessment, and now with Health Technology Assessment International, looking at molecular profiling and getting involved with this around the world in terms of access to molecular profiling with FT3 and Beat Cancer Coalition and our own Get Personal program. And what I'm really trying to say is that as we did these conferences, it impacted the work that we do at Colorectal Cancer Canada and many of our partners, both in Canada and around the world. So I think I'll leave it with that, and some of the other speakers can sort of give a little bit more perspective to it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Barry. And I should mention that you called out so many of the great speakers and sessions that we've had over the past 5 years. All of those sessions are still available on Colorectal Cancer Canada's website for anyone who wants to view them, and are still as relevant today as they were when they were given some time ago. Michael, I'm going to throw it over to you now. You've been a long-standing, incredibly fine contributor to these conferences. Why did Roche personally, why did Roche get involved? Why did you personally get involved in these conferences?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that. And thanks again for the invitation to participate and support this conference. It's such an incredible event, and I look forward to it every year. I think first, what I'd like to say is I love these sessions. I love this pause that we're taking 5 years, 6 years into it now to look back upon the 5 years of this conference and really have that opportunity to see the type of impact we've made, the type of impact everybody here has made in what we do day to day. And I think jumping off of what Barry said in terms of the work, the discussions, the commitments and collaborations that came through this conference and these different sessions that we've had, how they've impacted colorectal cancer. It's the same for Roche. It's the same for myself personally. It's, you know, Anne-Marie, you asked why first, initially, why me personally and by extension representing Roche, why did I join and support and agree to participate in this conference? And I think it starts with Barry's vision in terms of really something different. There's so many initiatives out there and there's so many events out there that elevate the patient voice in what everybody is doing. But this conference, what's special about this conference, what's special about this event is that it goes beyond the patient voice and really brings in and catalyzes patient action. And it's through those activities, through that commitment, through the collaborative environment that's built here, that has really infused patient inclusivity into everything that I do personally at Roche and outside of Roche, but then also the overall strategy and all the activities at Roche. Patient inclusivity becomes such an important part of how we move any of our initiatives forward, make any decisions on the different things that we do, the different things that we invest in, and even what informs how we move forward. You know, it's either it's by mere coincidence or it's some sort of this sort of greater architect of my career, but the progression of my own career has sort of mirrored the evolution of this conference. In the early days, we started talking about patient inclusivity in clinical trials, and at that time I headed up clinical trials at Roche, and then we moved into real world evidence, real world data, and I saw myself taking on the role of head of real world data and evidence at Roche, and ultimately moving into personalized healthcare, which is, you know, where we saw the evolution of this conference, and now looking into disruption and innovation in this space, and as head of innovation for Roche. it continues. The really tight connection between the topics that are discussed here, the relevancy of the topics we discuss, and bringing the patient into the center of it, or as Barry said, is the table of which we discuss upon, and really letting that steer forward. So our strategy for innovation at Roche, it's a broad one, but it starts with human centricity, patient centricity, people centricity. It starts with looking at it from that perspective. And I would be remiss to say that this conference and the discussions here didn't have an influence in shaping that strategy. It probably was one of the biggest influences in shaping the innovation strategy at Roche. And I hope it continues, this connection between this conference, what we do. I hope it continues to steer our strategies at Roche. I hope it continues to elevate the work that we do as much as it elevates the work that everybody else does. So I'll pause there and then give over the mic to the rest of my colleagues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I really love the phrase you've used, which is that it's beyond the voice. These conferences have catalyzed collaborative action across the community in so many different ways. Winston, we've always valued your tremendous expertise in particularly, I'll use the term very broadly, data. What has involvement in this conference meant to you, your organization, and how has it impacted your day-to-day?
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie, for, again, inviting me to speak today. I've learned a lot over the past 5 to 6 years through my involvement in this conference. And one of the lessons that I've learned is the value and merit of patient engagement, not only in clinical trials, but also in non-clinical trials or health outcomes research. And I think through this conference and also through the collaborations that have stemmed from this conference, it's really altered the way that my team has or will conduct RWE on an ongoing basis. I think I would kind of classify these changes into 3 major buckets. The first is just increasing recognition that patients are really the end users of our study findings. And, the convention of having the scientists come up with the research question first and then informing patients of the outcome, I think it's probably a very dated approach. So to this end, we've really prioritized patient centricity in our RWE studies as well. So to that end, we've conducted a number of patient priority setting partnerships using the James Linda Lyons methodology. And essentially, we've asked patients, what are their research priorities? What do they want to see from the use of their data? So we've done this in breast cancer and colon cancer, and it's been a really eye-opening experience because topics that we did not feel were as important were actually very important to patients and caregivers. So that's been very enlightening. The second bucket, I would say, is that we've also now recognized the importance of collecting outcomes and endpoints that matter to patients and caregivers. So, so this includes survival, obviously, but also quality of life, symptoms and toxicities, and patient satisfaction in clinic. So these patient-reported outcome measures and patient-reported experience measures are now, I would say, increasingly integrated in all of our work. And it's sort of part and parcel now with each clinic visit when a patient sees me or my colleagues. So I think that's also been a huge lesson. And I think the third theme I would say is we're also now appreciating the value of patient engagement throughout the entire research trajectory. So this includes study conception, study design. We also include patient advisors in our grant applications. And because we see value here, over the last couple of years, we've also now established an oncology-specific patient and family advisory council at our center. So this really ensures that the patient voice is heard throughout the research project. And along this vein, I would say we've also now prioritized significant resources in developing what we call plain language summaries. And the idea of these summaries is to dissect and distill study findings in a way that's more digestible and palatable to not only the scientific community, but also the broader patient community. And the feedback to this sort of initiative has been extremely positive. And again, I want to acknowledge all the co-chairs in the past several years and this conference, and again, collaborators that I've met through this conference, and really shepherding this initiative and really encouraging more patient-centric work. So it's been a very it's been an excellent growing experience, and also a learning experience for myself and my team.
Thank you, Winston. And the conferences have grown very much based on your contribution and that of your team too. I really like how you summarize this concept of rather than patients being informed or being at an end of a process, being incorporated through a broader trajectory of the entire research process. So I think that's a great springboard for discussion we'll have in a moment. Stephanie, I'd like to ask you the same question. BioCanRx has been a tremendous supporter and in fact, activator of patient engagement in so much of its work. What has involvement meant to you? What do you think we've accomplished?
Oh my goodness, what a huge question. What have we accomplished? I think what we've accomplished in working together, all of us colleagues here being engaged in this conference, is to really put to the forefront the need for patient engagement, and also highlighted the incredible value that comes from engaging patients in preclinical to clinical development. One of the reasons that BioCanRx joined very, very early on in the project, in this conference, was because we saw that there was a unique approach that was being used, where it was not only going to be about patient engagement in a very narrow part of the drug development process, but rather along the entire continuum, and not only patients, but patient groups. And that really resonated with us at BioCanRx, because it communicated to me that this initiative was really something that was going to have legs, that it was not just going to be a one-off, that it was going to have this kind of continuity. From the very beginning, BioCanRx and Colorectal Cancer Canada, this conference, were very, very well aligned. BioCanRx, from its very beginning, engage with a multitude of different patient groups, creating our own Cancer Stakeholder Alliance, which is how we came to know Colorectal Cancer Canada, and how we've come to work together, and defined initiatives where we could bring the Canadian academic research community together with patients. And the learnings have been immense, and because of the involvement of patient groups and their influence, instead of going from a unidirectional knowledge translation model, we completely tore that up and threw it out the window, and developed really a knowledge exchange program where we were informed by our patient groups about what was needed and the direction that we wanted to take. And the direction was being able to, yes, provide training to patients, on the science, on the research, on how to become a patient partner in the elaboration of clinical trial protocols, but also about training researchers on how to engage with patients. The comments that have been made by colleagues relative to plain language summaries, this is also an area that we've invested, doing same for all of the clinical trials that we fund. And then lastly, ensuring that we have those points of connection between the research community, between patient groups and patients, so that at the end of the day, we can spark the beginning of those collaborations between those groups. This is very much what this conference is about, from my perspective, from BioCanRx's perspective, is about being able to bring together different sectors where there is alignment around a common good. And the common good is what can we do for patients, and how can we make things better for patients. And what this conference has been able to do is to really unpack how we can work together what works, how we can make things better, more efficient, so that there's greater value for patients at the end of the day. So thanks for the question, Anne-Marie.
Thank you for such a beautiful answer. And to reinforce the theme of collaboration, each and every one of you has brought this concept of the need for better, bigger collaboration to succeed. Stephen, I want to, of course, welcome you and ask you a similar question in terms of why 3CTN is at the table, and particularly you and some of the personal value you've gotten out of the conferences as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Anne-Marie, for the great introduction as well, and greetings to my fellow panelists. And thank you very much. As always, one of the benefits of coming last is in the queue is that much of what I wanted to say as far as a introduction of the priorities that 3CTN sees in membership in this impact and attending this conference have been eloquently presented by my fellow panelists. And thank you also, of course, to Barry for your stewardship and unique and powerful support of patient and example set for patient engagement. 3CTN has, the Canadian Cancer Clinical Trials Network has seen in this conference a reflection of its own patient engagement strategy as a means for and this conference is a means for continuing to understand the active developments that are happening in the patient engagement community in cancer research and cancer trials here in Canada. It's also been a bellwether in terms of getting a broad sweeping input on emerging priorities in the changing landscape for trials. We operate at 3CTN in the support for academic cancer clinical trials specifically, but whether it's an industry-sponsored trial supported by our Roche and other companies here, BioCanRx, academic trials or investigator-initiated trials, there is that transforming and transformed approach to patient engagement that's happening. We've passed a tipping point, I'm happy to say, at least from our perspective, where patient engagement throughout the clinical trials continuum from idea generation that we see with our sponsor partners to where 3CTN comes in the actual conduct of and enabling the conduct of cancer trials at member centers across the country, and having local patient partners inform how the trial is delivered has been essential. And this conference plays a great role in understanding and providing the tools and practical tools for patient partners and building their knowledge. That's critical for effective patient engagement. Also being able to, and what's inspiring for me is being able to see the rich diversity and expertise that patient partners bring to the equation that has been recognized over and over again, allows organizations to step outside of their own often limited resource pool and information to harness the patient experience and ensure that that becomes, I think, as Stephanie said, embedded within the question and the research that's developed. So 3CTN's done that in the course of developing most of our initiatives historically and all of our initiatives currently, including some exciting developments in precision medicine mapping of cancer trials and having a patient-facing dashboard that allows patients and their caregivers and clinicians, as well as researchers, to find trials based on unique precision medicine biomarkers and drug targets. So that's really exciting, and that's been informed throughout its development by our patient partner community from the design through the implementation stage, as well as Canada's unique decentralized trial approach that 3CTN's and our collaborative partners in industry and academia and Health Canada have developed excitingly in the last couple of years, the CRAFT initiative for bringing trials, equitable trial access to patients. The question and the framework itself have been informed throughout by patient partners. So that's something I would say really has been embedded and changed in the current trial landscape that may have taken a different approach in the past, but I think they're both exciting examples of the state of the future in patient engagement, where patient partners will be at the table from the start, and as they should be.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I want to pick up in the couple of moments that we have left on a comment you made, is that we're past the tipping point. Patient centricity, patient engagement, patient group engagement, patient inclusivity is the future. And in that regard, Barry, I'd just like you to comment on the future and the kinds of initiatives or springboards that you want to build on based on this conversation that will define the future of patient inclusivity in the full research process and not just clinical trials specifically. And then I will go quickly around the table as final remarks.
I think it's actually already begun, and you can hear from what everybody has said that this conference and the work that we do has really been a catalyst for collaboration. And with each and every one of us who happen to be have been co-chairs of the event and working on it for all these years, there's been extensive collaboration in various projects, whether it's the, as Winson said, the JLA initiative, the James Lind Alliance to understand the patient perspectives, and with Stephanie with the GoCard trial and actually understanding the different steps of patient engagement, and with Stephen through the looking at the patient navigation as well as the CRAFT model for decentralized trials and working in those initiatives, and of course with Mike on the Canadian Personalized Healthcare Innovation Network and putting people together. So I see these collaborations really expanding, and of course none of them are specific to colorectal cancer, they're specific to cancer in general. And what's happened in recent years is we've seen a lot of international collaboration, and you can see from our keynote speaker today, Jan Geisler, how we work in Europe and in other countries really around the world, and with other organizations around the world. So I see this conference and the work that we all do as really a collaborative effort, and to expand those collaborations internationally to bring about access to to the best treatments for all cancer patients at the right time.
Thank you, Barry. And just a couple of quick comments from each of our co-chairs about how best can we focus some of the collaborative effort in the next couple of years. Anybody want to take that for starters? Okay. Michael, you had your hand up.
I think we all want to speak very quickly, and I think it's very similar to what Barry said. But for me, I think this conference itself, I mentioned it before, I think it's taking a lead in this space, but collaborating for action. So much of what we think is collaboration is just sitting around a table and discussing and having a conversation. I think this conference shows that you can have that, but really catalyzing action is the key to impact. And I think for all the work that we do and all the collaborations that we have, if we can focus on bringing ideas to action, bringing conversations to action, and actually doing stuff in the operational environment, that'll make true impact.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thanks, Emery. Building on Michael's, sorry, I'm getting feedback here. Building on Michael's comment, I think the opportunity would be to harness the work that's already been done by PACT in setting the framework that is the charter for patient group engagement, and the city using the city model as a framework for helping anyone new to the space get started in patient engagement and collaborate with sponsors and developing trials and with research in general. I think the other value of that is really and the opportunities in harnessing patient groups' collective experience and the strategic priorities that patient groups can uniquely do. It's a powerful further step that can be taken. Individual patient partners bring their own skills and experience, but I think patient groups have that unique value that sponsors recognize in being able to steer research priorities, for example, harness their communities for engagement in future activities, as well as mobilizing and supporting research funding potentially as well. So that and many more opportunities. I think that's an untapped potential that we can really focus on, especially in our space, for example, harnessing patient partners and in advancing clinical trials and developing new clinical trials.
Thank you. Final comments, Stephanie or Winson?
If you don't mind, Winson, I'll be very, very brief. My colleagues have spoken very, very eloquently. And to pick up on what they've said, especially with respect to action, this is a conference, this is a group of organizations, individuals that are very focused on action and delivering results. And if you're interested in having an impact, I would invite those that are listening to join, to ask questions and to participate and to get involved, roll up your sleeves with us. One of the reasons that as I've mentioned, that we've joined is, because of the strong commitment of Barry, of Colorectal Cancer Canada colleagues in this conference. There's, to me, it's about, yes, gaining the momentum, but all more important, right, to the point on discussions, is maintaining the momentum. And what this group brings is that potential for continuity and for always bringing back the attention on what this is about, which is patients. So thank you. Those are my final comments.
Mm-hmm.
And Winston, the floor is yours.
Sure. I just want to preface by saying that I just feel so energized and motivated by what all the speakers have said today, and in this session in particular. And I've seen firsthand, and my team has seen firsthand, how patient engagement really elevates a project and really compounds its impact. And I think as long as we keep on doing what we're doing, I think we're heading in the right direction. So, I look forward to more collaboration with this group and beyond. And I just feel very encouraged by this session's talk.
Thank you, Winston. As do I personally. And I know I speak on behalf of colorectal cancer when I say how forever grateful the organization is to each of you for your thought leadership, for your big brains, for your innovation, and for always supporting these conferences in the very best way possible. So a big thank you to all of you. I invite you again to go to Colorectal Cancer Canada's website to look for an incredible volume of content related to these conferences. So many incredible topics have been dealt with over the past few years, all of them very informing. Stephen mentioned something called PACT, P-A-C-T, and I invite all of you to come back to our conference tomorrow for our closing session, which is really going to launch an initiative that has been in development for some time, created as part of these conferences, created as part of the work that Colorectal Cancer Canada has done, and to learn more about how you can become involved, what PACT is all about, and how we are fundamentally moving forward on changing patient and patient group engagement in cancer clinical trials. Thank you for today's session and for joining us.